Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Welcome to hour number 23 of our 24-hour nonstop GMAT crash course marathon, raising money for Ukrainian refugee charities. Been doing this for so long, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Been up all night. It's fantastic. Hopefully this is going to be useful to some of you guys down the road. I got to be honest with you, this one's a little bit gratuitous. A lot of what I'm trying to display in this crash course, what really goes wrong for us? What does it really feel like to suffer through the GMAT? We could sit here and kind of work through all those foundations again. That's been done in plenty of videos, some videos I've done. There's stuff on the internet where we can kind of go, hey, let's rehash sort of the basic ways to read a passage or basic structures of critical reasoning or whatever. A lot of what I want to model here is what does it feel like to suffer and how do you get better at it? And the stuff where there's no magic, and kind of aiming this at folks that are maybe kind of at an intermediate level or maybe an advanced level and are just fighting for that next 10 points, 20 points, 30 points, those extra couple inches on verbal. And what is it like? What can you do? Sometimes you just get obliterated by hard language. It's going to happen to all of us. But how can we move the needle a little bit and fight a little bit harder to kind of take a really brutal passage, stop in the right places, digest in the right places. And again, no magic to it. It's just practicing a lot of these, getting comfortable with the discomfort, starting to embrace that pain of doing these really, really tough passages. Again, difficulties in the eye of the beholder here. I think this passage we're going to do is actually from the GRE, not the GMAT. Stylistically, I don't think there's a very big difference. I think it's super tough. My opinion, the stats on it, I think people really struggle with it. And again, reading comprehension. So we're going to do reading comp passage, a couple questions off of it, then do a couple tough reading comps, critical reasonings. But what I want you to focus on in this really, really tough reading comp passage, it's all one blob of text. I want you to think about when can you break it up? When can you stop and say, what's the author driving at? Do I see a purpose in here somewhere? I always want you to fight for purpose on reading comprehension. Stop as often as you need to go, hey, what's going on here? If you try to swallow that passage whole, you're going to get yourself into trouble. And again, some of you guys are going to really struggle with this one. I think it's pretty hard. I'd love to be wrong and y'all nail it. But part of getting better at it is just getting better at focusing and powering through, and no magic. Sometimes it's just a ton of practice. And again, learning where you need to stop, digest, and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. What's the author getting at here? Okay, I'm going to stop again partway through. What's the author getting at here? How does it connect to that first part? Gnarly little passage. There's some pretty funky turns of phrase here that are absolutely brutal. And here's the thing, when we talk about kind of breaking down these passages, and if you've watched other reading comp videos I've done, you hear me talk about this, where it's like, look, do you have to get every single word to get what you really need on that reading comp passage in order to move on to the questions? You don't need to get every word. So you're going to get beat sometimes. I mean, so kind of just above the first half of the passage, kind of the end of the first half. Granted that the presence of these elements need not argue for an authorial awareness of novelistic construction comparable to that of Henry James. That makes no sense. Now, do I really need it? I'm not really sure I do, to be honest with you, because as I look at that first half of the passage, let's kind of look at that and say, once you get to the however, maybe there's a new thought going on. So that first half, we're saying, okay, there's kind of two different ways of reading this, right? The second part is a counterpoint so many critics see the second part as a counterpoint that comments on it or reverses the first part. So that's one direction critics can go, is say, so second part is a counterpoint to the first, and then it talks about a romantic reading where it gets more confirmation. You can see the two parts of the whole as a whole instead, right? Okay, great. So there's this idea in there that you could read it as two different parts. You could read it as a whole. And then you get to that second part, the author takes a turn here and says, well, wait, any interpretation that seeks to unify all those diverse elements is not convincing. So you could read it as a whole and not as a bunch of diverse parts. It's a counterpoint, but you can't really do that. Why? And then you get some really messy stuff there again. But because Wuthering Heights has recalcitrant elements of undeniable power that resist inclusion and all-encompassing interpretation, again, you don't need every word. Not super important to get every word there. But again, what I'm seeing in your nice little summaries is this idea that, yeah, there's the critics that kind of say, hey, you could read the second part as a counterpoint to the first, or you could take a romantic reading where you take it all as a whole. But the authors are arguing that an interpretation that unifies all of this diversity of Wuthering Heights is going to be unconvincing. Is that good enough? We can find out when we get to the answer choices. But again, don't obsess over, don't be a perfectionist here. If you can kind of understand the author's main idea and how those ideas connect, you might have enough to fight on. Let's go ahead and hit a couple of the questions real quick here. All right, this is hard, you guys. So I think it's actually the what this is pointing to, which the following inferences about Henry James's awareness of novelistic construction is best supported by the passage. That sentence that brings up Henry James's authorial awareness, that was actually one of the ones I think I was clowning a minute ago, where I was saying, "Hey, I can't make a whole lot of sense of this thing." I didn't really understand why we're talking about Henry James. I am not well read enough to know who Henry James is, frankly. I'm a culturalist cretin. So here's that sentence again, or that chunk of the sentence: an authorial awareness of novelistic construction comparable to that of Henry James. Okay, I think we're saying that this Henry James guy has a pretty good authorial awareness of novelistic construction, is very aware of the construction of novels. I assume he's a novelist as well. I'm going to have a really hard time here, to be honest. I mean, part of this is pureed brain at this point. I think I've gone from mashed potato brain to applesauce brain with gravy. It's going to be really hard for me to eliminate the wrong answers, but I see one that just jumps out at me as right, which is not good hygiene. It's not a good technique. I'm going to do my best to refute the others. James, more than any other novelist, was aware of the difficulties of novelistic construction. I don't know that there's anything about James being aware of the difficulties. I don't quite see that there. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't see where James is aware of the difficulties, number one. Number two, more than any other novelist. I think it's kind of saying the opposite, right? Well, it's not saying the opposite, but is there a comparison here where we're saying that James, more than any other novelist, is aware of this stuff? There's no comparison between James and anybody else, really. It's saying that the presence of these elements in Bronte's work need not argue for an awareness that James has. But even then, it doesn't quite go to say that she lacks the awareness that James has. It doesn't even say that. It says it need not argue for it. So going way too far to make that comparison and say that James, more than any other novelist, is out. B, James is very aware of the details of novelistic construction. Yeah, I think, maybe I'm misreading it, but I think that's exactly what that's saying here. So I'm going to hang on to B. C, James's awareness of novelistic construction derived from his reading of Bronte. Whoa, we're way off the reservation here. We don't say anything at all. Like, how do we know that James even reads Bronte? There's a comparison here between their writing or their authorial awareness of construction, but we have no idea if James has read Bronte or even has any idea who she is. D, James's awareness of novelistic construction has led most commentators to see Unity as individual novels. We don't know anything about what most commentators in general know about this guy. D's out. E, James's awareness of novelistic construction precluded him from violating the unity of his novels. I'm pretty lost there. I don't think we know anything about the unity of James's novels here. All we know is this is the only mention of him. His authorial awareness of novelistic construction. B captures that, E doesn't. So again, if you're getting intimidated by this stuff, look, this is stuff where I think even when I'm rested, I'm going to struggle with this passage. I'm going to have to really fight through, really concentrate hard, find those moments where I go, okay, wait, I'm going to stop here and reread it and make sure I fight for that purpose. I might miss sentences. I struggled with the sentence until I had to break it down. And this becomes kind of about focus and saying, well, let me take that chunk. There's nothing else there that even refers to James. Let me see if I can break that down enough to fight my way through this question. Good, tough one here. One more on this passage, and then we're going to switch over to critical reasoning, and then we get to the fun stuff with Buñuel. This one's pretty tough as well, and going to be honest with you, I'm really going to struggle to explain why some of these guys are wrong, given the state of my brain at the moment. And this is going to be the last question for this passage, and then there's some good questions about inferences actually that came up. I'm going to circle back to those for the previous question we went through. Author of the passage would be most likely to agree that an interpretation of a novel should. Okay, really big key here. The question is talking about the author's point of view and what they would agree on, that an interpretation of a novel, not necessarily this novel, a novel in general. That's actually kind of the key here. Do you think the author would agree that an interpretation should not try to unite heterogeneous elements in the novel? I don't think the author's arguing that at all. I think the author is arguing that trying to do that with this particular novel is problematic and is actually saying, so what is it that the author generalizes that? So it's kind of look at that last half of the passage. An interpretation that seeks to unify all of the novel, this novel's diverse element, is bound to be somewhat unconvincing. It's not because such an interpretation necessarily stiffens into a thesis. It's not that it's necessarily a problem, but because this particular novel has a whole bunch of fancy words. This particular novel, Wuthering Heights, has certain elements of power that resist that rigid interpretation. Look at that little chunk in parentheses. although rigidity in any interpretation of this or any novel is always a danger. This is where people are struggling, I think, between A and B. And since I'm not seeing any love for C, D, and E, I'm not going to spend any time on them because they're going to hurt my brain. So that's kind of the scope shift I think people are getting caught in a little bit. She doesn't think you should be trying to unite heterogeneous elements of this novel, Wuthering Heights. But look at that bit in parentheses, rigidity in interpretation is always a danger. That's B. So this is almost, I think it might be the only time in the passage where the author talks about general interpretations of novels in that parenthetical statement, although rigidity is always a danger. So B is spot on. You should not be inflexible. Any interpretation should not be inflexible in its treatment of the elements in the novel. And there you go. I want to glitch back here to one of the questions that came up on the inference question. I had some really good, productive, kind of general questions about inferences, if I can find these again. None of it with these questions. Really enjoy it. Thank you. Although I agree that I can eliminate all the other options except B. Isn't an inference supposed to bring new information to the picture? This is actually another, I'd say, common kind of general fallacy. Critical reasoning and reading comp both is that when you see the word inference, it's really easy to say, well, it's something that's not literally stated in the passage. I think that's really, 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 really dangerous. And back in the day, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I think I did a video about, I think it might have been a video titled something like 7 Biggest Mistakes You Make in Critical Reasoning and Reading Comp. And this is one of the big things I talked about, is overthinking inferences and going, well, it isn't stated. And as soon as you get in that mindset, you're going to start picking answer choices that are where you've got to add things to it. When you see the word inference, critical reasoning or reading comp, what I want you to think is, hey, which of the following is most true? That's it. Don't get caught up in the business of, is it stated, is it not stated? You can get yourself into real trouble. A lot of things that are inferences are really, really simple restatements. Now, nothing simple about this passage, in my opinion. But if I say something like, hey, I know this guy, Chuck, happily eats 6,000 calories of food daily and is a renowned enthusiastic eater. Inference. Chuck likes food. Now, a lot of people would look at this and say, well, no, that's too obvious, right? That is basically stated in the passage. No, it's not directly stated. It feels so obvious. You feel like I already said it in the dumb little passage up there. But yeah, this is a very true statement, very easily inferred from that passage. It feels too obvious. Don't fight an answer to an inference question because it feels too obvious. It's almost certainly your right answer. It certainly isn't going to be outside information. It might be something that's not stated directly, but it still has to be something that is very much supported by the passage. Don't overthink it. It can be anything from a very, very simple restatement to maybe something you got to fight for a little bit. But bottom line is, when you see the word inference, I want you to think, which of the following is most true? That's it. Keep it that simple. Stop you from getting into trouble. And similar comment here from Sanjana. And again, apologies for mispronunciations. Yeah, textbook definition, dictionary definition of inference, you're spot on. But I think it gets you into trouble because then you start kind of hallucinating stuff and you start taking things for a walk and saying, well, that one's too obvious. So when you see inference, simplify your approach and just say, hey, I'm looking for the thing that is most supported. Which one of these is the most correct, most true, based on what I see in the passage? That is it. Don't make it any more complicated than that. And even Maria, as you know, love her work. But yeah, you're both right. There's a dictionary definition of it. But I think in terms of your habits of mind on the GMAT or LSAT or GRE, whichever one you're doing, that can actually get you in a little bit of trouble. And I just want you to think of it as which one is the most true. That's it. Super, super simple. I think that wraps up the reading comprehension. That thing hurt my brain. Let's do a couple critical reasonings real quick that I think are pretty nasty. Some of the toughest ones I could find. Somewhat gratuitously, again, if you're struggling with these, you are not alone. Please do not be embarrassed by it. A lot of this is having a little bit of fun in hour number 23, having you guys watch me stumble and fumble. Is this useful for you? I don't know. But one of the things that I think, sometimes test prep people, and again, a lot of the crowd on GMATClub doesn't make this mistake, but I think, sometimes we make it look easy, whether we mean to or not, and it isn't. It just isn't. And I think that's something that you just need to embrace, that sometimes you're going to get punched in the face by this stuff. And especially on adaptive tests like the GMAT, depending on what your goals are, how many of these you need to get right? This level of question depends on what your goals are. If you're shooting for a 40, I'm not crying if you get the snot beat out of you on this question, because it is really hard. This is the kind of thing where if you want a 46, 47 on verbal for some reason, yeah, I should be able to get this. But for most of you shooting for a 700, 40 on verbal, really good practice. The more you fight through these really tough passages and work on that skill of breaking it down, breaking it into pieces, trying to figure out how those pieces fit together, the more you practice that, the better you're going to get. It's going to help you on easier questions too. Really good skill to develop. But for most of you with reasonable goals, you don't need to get the snot beaten out of you by this, and no shame in missing the questions here, but really, really good for you to get in the habit of fighting through it. Part of why I like the LSAT so much. Sometimes you get these really, really tough passages. Yeah, real quick. This is a good one. Actually, go back to Hasim real quick. Yes, that's exactly it. Don't consider the outside information. Just don't do it. There's no reason to do that on an inference. We're just saying, hey, which of the following is the most true? Keep it that simple. That's it. So don't bring in that outside information. A lot of what the deal is on GMAT verbal in general, don't bring in outside information. As soon as you start going, well, if this is true, and if this is true, and if that is true, you're taking the passage for a walk. You have a very high risk of getting yourself into trouble. Great question here too, Whitney. I think I wrote a whole article about this years ago on GMATClub, and maybe I'm making that up. I feel like there was kind of a thing that somebody asked me, and I wrote a whole rant about how to go from good, 40, 42 to kind of a 45 level. I don't know if that article's any good. I haven't looked at it in years. Yeah, look, if you're at a 42, you're doing great. I mean, that's a fantastic score. That's 90-something percentile. That's magnificent. What do you need those 3 points for? There might be a good answer to that, right? But I think for people watching in general, it's like, what do you want a 45 quant or 45 verbal for? Chances are, again, if you're applying for an MBA, most business schools, they need to see a strong quant score out of you, probably 47 or above. Depends on your profile. I don't want to overgeneralize that. So if you've got a 42 on verbal and you're kind of at that 47, 48 level on quant, do you really need to push that verbal higher? So that's one question. I think we sometimes see people who are kind of fighting for higher scores, and they don't really need it for what their either composite score goal is or what their business school goals are. So that's one thought. You might have a really compelling reason looking at the averages of schools you're applying to and kind of what the rest of your profile is. You might talk to an admissions consultant, and if my brain was working a little better, I would name all the sponsors we've had today. MBA Mission, Gatehouse, Stratus, Missionato, Applicant Lab, obviously. I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but Personal MBA Coach. Some of these wonderful folks that have been doing this forever. And they might say to you, hey, do you think you can squeeze out a 760 instead of a 740? And that's where this conversation about bringing the verbal score up matters. But just make sure that you're not doing this, that you know why you're doing this, and that you have that in kind of the context of your overall admissions goals. That said, what are we arguing about here from a 42 to a 45? It's 3 questions, 4 questions. That's it. So yeah, it's fighting for these little scraps. Like, are there little bits of kind of the mechanical stuff? Are there little bits you can pick up? If versus whether is a silly little thing that's come up a couple times today. How often do you see it? I don't know. It's maybe 4 or 5 questions out of all the official ones that have been released. It's not that big. Yeah, at the point where you're trying to get those last couple questions right, you probably need to fight for those little things. You probably need to look really hard at your results and say, yeah, do I see any patterns at all? Do I tend to miss assumption questions a little bit disproportionately? A little bit. You're not missing a lot if you're at a 42. Then maybe there's something there you need to work on. But yeah, I mean, it really is like once you're fighting for that kind of mid 700 score, or fighting for that mid 40 score on verbal, 50, 51 score on quant, it's just you're scrapping for every little quarter point, and it's fine tuning this little thing and that little thing, and just doing enough passages that you just get slowly a little bit better at powering through them. And I wish there was better advice than that. But that's really it. It's kind of fighting for every little inch, and it's maddening. One last wisecrack on that is that the GMAT isn't very good. Once you kind of get to the top of the score scale, sometimes that 3 points, again, it's 3 or 4 questions, might be good day versus bad day. I'm not saying that if you're at a 40 level, you're going to magically get a 45 on your best day. Very unlikely. But if you're kind of somewhere in that 42 to 45 range, your 43-ish is where your skills are. Yeah, 41 one day, 45 the next. That's just kind of natural variability. And I think you're a little more subject to it at the top of the score scale like that, because a couple questions swings it. And again, that's frustrating because it certainly can matter for admissions. Yeah, these are really, really good general questions here. Not to get super into admission stuff, but always love hearing from Maria on this stuff. Right about the 47 plus being for most people kind of the floor for top programs. Maria has seen many, many, many applicants, knows what she's talking about. I just saw a good one here. Overall time management. John, I assume you're referring to verbal here, since that's what this lesson is on. Yeah, Quant, we've got one rant. Not going to spend time on that here since this is a verbal hour. But if you're curious about time management on Quant, one of our tutors at GMAT Ninja, Mike, did a really, really good video on it a couple of years ago. Come over to the GMAT Ninja YouTube channel. Check that out. Pretty short video. I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, something like that. That'll help you there, because I think there really is a strategy on Quant that can help you. Verbal, look, guys, one of the things that really sucks about verbal is I don't think there's a lot of strategy that can help you. And this has actually come up a couple times in the chat, and I haven't really addressed it yet. There's time management strategies. And I think for Quant, it's like, hey, let go of the questions that are hard for you. That's really the strategy. Invest your time in things you got a real shot at getting. That's what efficiency means. Again, go check out Mike's rant on the GMAT Ninja YouTube channel for that one. Verbal, I don't think there's management strategies, really. I think all you can really do is get more efficient. Yeah, you don't want to obsess. If you're spending 5 minutes on those last two answer choices, at some point you got to walk away, man. I mean, so that's a little bit of a strategy, but it's almost impossible to glance at a verbal question and know whether it's hard right away. You kind of get through, 50, 60, 80% of the work before you realize you're in trouble. And bailing at that point, yeah, if you know you're really screwed, go ahead and bail, save whatever time. If the time's going to be wasted, walk away, you bet. But Quant, I think in 30 to 60 seconds, you can see if you're in trouble, bank that time for something else. Verbal, you can't do that. There's not really time management strategies. Usually on verbal, it's just you go until you can't go anymore and dial down the center after that, just guess. And there's not much more you can do. And I've seen a million different variations of, this timing trick or that timing trick, and they usually do more harm than good. So really, time management on verbal, it's just gaining efficiency. It's all the stuff we've been talking about, building your strength at cracking these passages. As we talk about critical reasoning, right? It's like sometimes thinking structurally really, really helps you, depending on the passage type. Reading comp, same thing. You don't want to overread, you don't want to underread. That's a really hard skill to calibrate. But if you obsess over detail and go fact, you're going to waste a bunch of time. You're going to get to that main idea question and go fact, and spit out a random fact instead of understanding the author's overall purpose. So all of those things that I talk about in all the verbal videos about good hygiene, critical reasoning, reading comp, sentence correction, all three of them, you master some of those strategies over time. And again, some of them are really hard to learn. I mean, they're things that are really slow burns. That's what's going to make you more efficient. I don't think of it as speed. I think of it as more efficiency. That's really all you can do. For some of you guys, reading speed's a real issue. If you happen to be a super slow reader, yeah, you're always going to run into timing problems on verbal, and it sucks. But I think what we see mostly out of our students, we get this question a lot, like, hey, I'm not finishing the verbal section on time. I have to scramble after question 30 or whatever. I'd say a majority of them, we find stuff that's going on with their process that's slowing them down. So there's room to gain. Do we still meet people whose reading speeds are really, really slow? Yeah, it happens. Not sure it happens a ton, but it happens. Another good question here. I didn't mean to make this hour in a Q&A, but might as well run with it while we got it. So correlation between the score and number of snakes we can afford to get to a specific score. A lot of ink gets spilled on this on the forum. I don't remember anything in particular that I've written about it, but I'm sure there's a lot of stuff there. And maybe somebody who can think of a good article about kind of how that works. Wouldn't be surprised if Buñuel's written something there. I want to be really careful with this, Fahad, and again, apologies for any mispronunciations. The way I want you to think about the GMAT, fundamentally what that algorithm is doing is it's trying to find the level of question at which you get half right, half wrong, and there's some twists and turns to it. You're not going to miss exactly half of it. You can miss a whole crap ton of questions and do really, really well, especially on Quant, depending on how you define well. Honestly, this question, I think, depends on your score goal. If you're telling me that you want to, let's say, a 45 Quant and a 35 verbal, just pick some semi-random numbers, you can miss a ton of questions and get those scores. And you could miss very few questions and get those same scores. It just depends on what you miss. What you miss matters more than how many you miss. That's the bottom line on the GMAT, which is why I harp on this business of good hygiene. Don't make the careless errors. Make sure you're doing things to make sure you're getting the stuff you know how to do. As you get higher on the score scale, it becomes a little bit easier for us to say, yeah, to get a 45, you can only, on verbal, let's say, super elite score. That is a tough score to get. You're looking for a 45 on verbal. Yeah, you're missing 3 or 4. We can say those kinds of things top into the score scale. As you get into kind of the middle or even kind of, somewhat above average, but not super elite. Yeah, you can miss more questions than the guy next to you and get a much better score depending on what you miss. If the guy next to you misses a bunch of easy stuff, you nail the easy stuff, get obliterated by the hard stuff, you might make twice as many errors and get a better score on that section. So again, in terms of your mindset, what I want you to think about here is get the stuff right you need to get right. What you miss matters more than how many. And again, if you're way up on the score scale, we can start to have a conversation about a specific number of questions that gets you in the ballpark. Hope that helps a little bit, Fahan. Mountains of questions. This is turning into a Q&A, and that's cool. Some of these are really good. Gloomy Bison, great one. I think there is such a thing as how precisely you can read. So when I give you a passage, a sentence, a paragraph, whatever it is, one of three things can happen to you. You can nail it, get the author's intent exactly, understand with pinpoint precision. That's a skill required of lawyers, for example. If you can't be super precise, you're gonna have a really hard time as a lawyer. Category number two is that you get the gist, but you're missing a little bit of the detail. You drop a word here or there. There's some fine shades of meaning that you struggle with. And thing number three is you get obliterated. Now we all have passages, and certainly moments too. Like, your reading ability in a given moment is going to be, variable. Mine is falling apart as we get to almost hour number 24 here. But I think even at our best, we all have a reading ceiling, and it is hard. It is far from impossible to push that reading ceiling upward. You can do it. You spend more time reading stuff. Got a couple of articles about that on the forum. You spend more time reading stuff, you're going to get better at reading. I mean, that ceiling is going to increase. It just takes time. So I think we all kind of have that fundamental ceiling where there's some kind of level of passage where we're likely to get just the gist and not the exact meaning, or likely to get obliterated. It happens to everybody. Everybody has that ceiling, myself very much included. That's what I mean by that. Now, things we talk about in test prep, where it's like, hey, here's the technique I want you to employ when you do reading comp or critical reasoning. We're talking about process and not improving your actual reading ability. We're trying to improve the way you approach these passages or this task or process elimination. So in the short run of, let's say, a couple months, somebody comes to us for tutoring, or you come to the forum, you start asking questions, you come to these live events or whatever, and you say, well, hey, I got 2 months to study before my exam. How do I get better at, let's say, reading comprehension? In 2 months, you're probably not going to become a fundamentally better reader, maybe by a little bit, but not by a lot. It takes more time than that. But can we make your processes better? Probably yes. So hope that helps, Gloomy Bison. Awesome questions today and yesterday. Okay, wow. And yes, this is true. You guys are asking really good questions that I'm happy to answer. It's actually easier for me than battling through some of these crazy critical reasonings I picked out for you guys. First few questions. Yeah, this is another good one. I think warm-ups are good. I think it depends on why you struggle. Is it that your brain's not warmed up? Or is it that you're getting a little anxious in the beginning, which is totally normal? If you kind of have an issue kind of with focus in the beginning, you might want to check out. So, brought Dr. Jenny Foreman on sometime in that first half of the day today. Had a lot to say about kind of resetting your routines. Got a bunch of similar content from a sports psychologist on our YouTube channel at GMAT Ninja. So if it's kind of a performance thing where you're just not locked in yet, maybe that's something that can help. I'm a big fan of doing warm-ups. Sometimes people just struggle to get in gear. It might be something physical as well. I mean, there could be all kinds of things causing that. Not a stupid question at all. I mean, this is actually a big deal. And one of the things, if I'm analyzing somebody's ESR, their enhanced score report, it's one of the things I look for. Like, hey, you're struggling at the beginning and end of sections. If you are, there's probably something going on there where you've got some performance issue. Could be any number of things. I like the warm-up idea. Sometimes section order can help. There are people out there that still choose to do the kind of not very important stuff, AWA and IR, at the beginning, because then they're kind of into the groove of thinking and writing and reading stuff. That's another option. It's not right for that many people, might be for you. So sorry, it's kind of a generic answer, but it is a really valuable thing for you to think about. And as you kind of do your practice tests, and for that matter, your practice sets, try to focus on, hey, what happens on the days when I'm better at the beginning of the section? What happens on the days when I'm worse? And see if you can drill into it a little bit. And this is awesome. Seeing family drop by. Very, very cool. All right. I cannot even keep track with all these questions. Let me talk about the gaps. Yeah, another good one, Natasha. Can you talk about the gaps between successive mocks? Got a whole article up on the forum, also on our website at GMAT Ninja, about what are the reasons why your actual tests don't match your practice test scores. And that actually kind of gets at the same question. I know you're talking about the gaps between your practice tests, but it's the same kind of factors, right? One might be that if they're non-official tests, it might be that those tests are faulty and they're kind of giving you funky scores. Very, very possible. Might be possible that you've seen some of the questions before. I religiously have stayed away from GMAT prep questions from those MBA.com tests today. I didn't always do that in my previous videos. You can go search around for questions on the forum and do a ton of GMAT prep questions, and then your tests are warped a little bit. All kinds of stuff like that can happen. Maybe it's a performance issue. Maybe it's just that you're not systematic. That's the biggest thing. I'd say reason number one for differences in your practice tests, if they're official practice tests, good quality, haven't seen the questions before, you're probably not systematic. You're doing different things on different days. You don't have a process for each question type that you can repeat. And so you're kind of like, oh, for example, you might be saying, hey, today I'm going to sit down for the exam and I'm going to read the reading comp extra hard. Now you're in trouble, right? If you're sitting down for an exam and you're reading differently than you have before, different things are going to happen, right? So whatever your process is needs to be super, super consistent. Again, that's hard. I mean, that's kind of everything we've been talking about that gets really difficult, is how do you get better over time at being super systematic and locking these ways of doing things into place? It's really tough. It can take time. So I hope that helps a little bit, Natasha. I know it's kind of another, could be a million things kind of answers. Getting messages from my kids. This is fun. And I'm trying to figure out which questions in here are going to be useful for everybody in general. I know this is supposed to be a verbal hour here, but I like this question. In a day, yeah, go get some sleep. Don't watch my stupid sweaty face here in hour number 24. Go get some rest, get a good meal, relax. If your test is tomorrow, just get your mind right. Go in there super relaxed. Quant, you're not going to get better at quant between now and tomorrow. Can you get better at execution? All the stuff I've been barking about in 11 quant lessons today, or 10 of them. Number 11 is coming up in 10 minutes. Read twice, check your work, plot your path forward, all that stuff. Don't make careless errors. Your job, especially when you're at 17th percentile, nail the stuff you know how to do. Nail the stuff you know how to do. Don't waste your time on the stuff you don't. Keep moving. If you're stuck on something, that's a good path forward, get out of there. Nail the stuff you can understand. It's going to take time to really raise that score a lot. But if we're talking about moving the needle by 10, 20 percentage points, yeah, maybe getting your mind right, getting your body right, and just really concentrating on being super accurate on the stuff you know how to do, letting go of the rest might move the needle a little bit. Yeah, another really good question here. And again, apologies for the mispronunciations, Sushil. How much time should you give to a verbal question before guessing moving to the next? That's another tough one. Because I think it depends on the question, depends on why you're struggling. I think at whatever point you recognize, I think a not very useful generic thing we can say is at whatever point you recognize you're in real trouble, and investing any further time is likely to be a waste, yeah, move on. But I don't think there's any particular number we can say, hey, at 2 minutes, move on. Because if you're at 2 minutes, let's say it's sentence correction, and 20 more seconds is all you need to lock in your answer, spend the 20 seconds. It's worth it at that point. 20 seconds to get a right answer versus a coin toss. Between the last two, I'll take it. Now, if I start obsessing over two answer choices and I'm totally lost and I got nothing, at some point, yeah, maybe I do have to move on. So yeah, no real rule for this. It's one of those things you have to kind of experiment with a little bit. And just think about at what point is this a waste of time? And as you kind of track your times, one of the nice features of the new MBA.com interface, you actually get the times now on those official MBA.com tests. You can see the individual question times. Look at the ones that took you the longest and ask yourself, as you review your practice exams in particular, or your practice sets, are there any of these that I spent 3 minutes, 4 minutes on, maybe even 2.5 minutes on, and missed anyway, where I should have seen a moment where I was in trouble and moved on? And again, depending on the test taker, maybe that's going to be common for you on verbal, that you're going to see opportunities to move on. A lot of test takers really never have that at all. They're going to get to some point where they go, well, I've got my best guess and I'm going to move on. They don't have to worry about it too much. But again, just depending on kind of what sorts of things you're struggling with, I would just pay attention to your own data. You see those 3 and 4 minute questions, try to ask yourself, was there a moment when I should have bailed? Another good question here, Sahil. And again, apologies for the mispronunciations. Verbal not as good as quant. Should I start with the comfort zone paper verbal? I think you're talking about section order here, I assume. Yeah, I think that's just a personal detail. I've got a rant about section order, if that's what you're getting at here, over on the GMAT Ninja YouTube channel, how to choose your section order. I don't think it necessarily matters a ton. There are things you can look for in your performance that might direct you one direction or the other. But I don't think that's necessarily going to make a huge difference. It's very, very rare that we run into students either on the forums or in real life whose performance is radically different, changing the section order. Maybe you're an exception. You can check out that video. It's pretty short, maybe 6 minutes. That might help a little bit. If you find a reading comp passage, you have some knowledge of it, some background in it, don't let it trick you. Stick to the passage. Be literal, be literal. Two different errors I see on passage types where people get intimidated, or not necessarily intimidated, get led astray by the topic. It's never because it matters if you have pre-existing knowledge exactly. Every passage is designed to be totally fair. It doesn't matter what your background is. It's a test of reading. It's not a test of your science knowledge or anything like that. The mistake you can make in your own head is you get intimidated by something. I'm uncomfortable with science, and then I read it badly. The same thing can happen in something that I am very comfortable with. Studied economics. I like economics passage. And now my own knowledge of economics is getting in the way. I'm bringing in my own outside stuff. And I'm not reading what's there. I'm reading some combination of whatever's going on in my brain about economics and what's there. So absolutely true. And this is part of kind of developing a really consistent process on reading comp or critical reasoning or anything else, is trying to make sure you kind of calibrate right where you keep all that outside stuff out of it, and don't worry about the topic. It should be the same exact process no matter what the topic is. And again, really hard to achieve. It's hard to turn off that voice in your head that's saying, hey, I know a bunch about this topic. Yeah, but what about this? Got to really fight to turn that off and get you into trouble. Yeah, related to a question we had earlier. So trying to solve verbal within the exam time limit, pacing is a problem. Look, they don't hand out any trophies or any cookies or any bottles of wine for finishing the section on time. And what you need to think about is, given kind of what your constraints are in terms of your speed as a test taker, especially on verbal, how do you best allocate those 65 minutes? Where do you put them? So if you have to do all the questions, let's say that you need 20% more time. If you had 20% more time, you could answer everything comfortably. So you got 80 cents on the dollar when you do the verbal section. How do you want to allocate that? Do you want to do 80% of the questions really carefully and systematically? Or do you want to spend put 80% effort into all 36 questions? The latter is a bloodbath. If you try to cut off that last 15, 20 seconds, that last 20% of a verbal question, that's where the misreads are going to happen. That's where you're going to miss that little detail that's going to kill you. If you try to speed up verbal, and you're thinking in your head, I'm just going to go faster, not building better processes that make you more efficient, that's a good thing to do. But if you're saying, hey, today I'm going to go faster on verbal so that I can end on time, you're going to miss all kinds of easy questions. Can't say it enough, guys. Adaptive test, you miss easy questions. That's where you get into trouble. Easy for you. Don't let that happen. If you can handle 32 questions comfortably and be accurate on them, and those last 4, you got to guess. I'd rather have that than see you kind of, pardon my language, half-ass your way through the whole thing and make sloppy errors all over the place. Again, no trophies for finishing up. Now, if you have a real problem, you can only finish 25 questions in the time allotted. Now, that's a different problem. Maybe that's a reading speed issue. Maybe it's that your processes are so broken, you need a whole lot more practice. That's a deeper issue. But if we're talking about you struggle with those last 3 or 4 questions, look, you're probably better off guessing on those last few and just be as accurate as you can be up until that point. Maybe time for one more real quick. And yep, Ian, as usual, spot on. Getting hard questions wrong won't hurt you very much. Doesn't matter where they are on the test. Doesn't matter if it's the first 10, quant, verbal, universal principle of the GMAT. Missing the hard ones, good. Don't beat yourself on the ones that are a little bit easier. Yeah, this is a much longer topic, how exactly it works. If any of you guys are having a hard time sleeping, we can have a conversation about the 3-parameter logistic model in computer adaptive testing. That is a word from our non-sponsor. That's a word from my PhD advisor. I bailed on my PhD program halfway in because that stuff's not very exciting. So we can get into that. Bottom line is, don't worry about the algorithms doing. Don't worry about the man behind the curtain. Does not help you one bit. You control what you can control. Get the stuff right you know how to handle. Nice, clean process. Don't panic. Don't start rushing through stuff. And I wouldn't worry about this. Again, it can be fun to talk about. And maybe at some point we'll do something, one of the YouTube channels where we can get into some of those super nerdy details if anybody really wants it. But again, it's pretty academic. I don't think it helps you a whole ton. Thank you, everybody, for carrying me into a Q&A and letting me off the hook on those super, super crazy pants, hard critical reasoning questions I'd selected. Not at all where I was expecting this was going to go, but you guys are asking amazing questions. Thank you so much for keeping my head off the desk.